Thank you everyone for joining the NEMSIS V3 implementation call. Today is June 10th. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. We've got some good discussions on the docket for today. We made one shift and just moved up a topic to the second item on the agenda, just so that we can make sure we have enough time for this discussion item. So I think we will just jump in. Let's go ahead and turn it over to you, Eric, if you'd like to introduce that topic and discussion.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Julianne, for accommodating the change. I know that to the version 3 call, we have added some our colleagues from the U.S. Fire Administration, particularly work with NFIRS, and then some other colleagues from other organizations that typically do not attend this call to address this topic. The topic we brought up at the last meeting, and I've talked about it with the data managers very briefly, is the collection of PPE data for the purposes of requesting, in this case, particularly PPE during the COVID response, became a very hot topic. There was a lot of discussion about who was getting it. People were reporting at the federal level that they had made requests. The requests weren't being met. They weren't getting the volume of supplies that they need, so on and so forth. So my request, and I've talked with a couple different vendors and a couple different individuals, and my request is to look at how we can utilize the existing software that services are using to generate a request and with a direct link to your locality, your county, your state, and then ultimately to the Fed to report the need for, in this case, PPE supplies. But as we perhaps get into a second wave where maybe medications become an issue as well, we could expand it out to that. So I don't want to limit it to just PPE, but right now that's the focus. Report requests and make requests through that process. So during the COVID response, hospitals and nursing homes were actually using a network that some of you may be familiar with and some of you may not be familiar with, called the National Healthcare Safety Network. And they had specific forms developed for long-term care facilities and for hospitals. And basically it had an ID number at the top of it, a certification number, so it was recognized as a known entity, that somebody couldn't just create a request for a whole bunch of PPE and get it supplied. The facility name and reporting, and they asked very simply, in a very straightforward way, do you have any of these things, N95 mask, surgical mask, eye protection goggles, and so forth? Do you have a supply, yes or no? And then do you have enough for 1 week, 7 days, based on your current census, based on your current status? So that was in part how distribution determination was made for PPE coming out of the Strategic National Stockpile and coming through the different networks. Now, I want to make one thing very clear, and I mean very clear. What we're talking about doing here is not circumventing the existing process for requesting PPE through your typical emergency management process. We are not replacing that, have no intentions of replacing that. This is simply to augment the reporting process. We know that EMS is not housed in its own state and sometimes county administrative offices. It's often part of the Department of Health. It might be a part of another agency within your locality. So your request would go through many channels to get to where it needs to go. And it could be reprioritized, deprioritized, or it could be simply not met or lost. All we're trying to do is create a secondary tracking system so that when somebody says, hey, we made these requests, we can say we have those requests, and at the state and at the federal level, when we hear that state X or a large metropolitan area isn't getting what they need, we can step in and say, hey, look, here are the requests that we're going forward. Why are these not being met? Because what we have heard time and time again, very loud and clear, is that that has been a problem in the COVID response for EMS up in, and when I say EMS, I'm including fire and EMS together, emergency responders, providing healthcare on the front lines. Time and time again, that has been a problem through the COVID response to this point. That's the goal here. The request to you folks as the vendors for the services that are out there is this something that you can do through a notification of your software? And I realize each one of you handles things differently. I understand. Is it something that would have to be built out as a separate form? And how quickly could this be done? This is something we're looking at having in place in, we'll say, 60 to 90 days. That's the request. That's the ask. And what I'd like to do is open it up for questions, comments, and concerns from the participants.
Yeah, so Eric, this is Clay. Maybe I'll kick off the conversation just a little bit to make sure that I'm kind of clear on this. So the request is only to indicate the need, right? The, requesting or indicating that they do or do not have enough PPE and the different types of PPE for a specific period of time. It's not to document its use or whether it's being reused. The only question on the table is an indication of your need for PPE. Is that correct?
At this point, that's correct. I think that I know that ESO has an excellent tool for like a burn rate calculator that they show. And they show also use and reuse of supplies. So I think that the ability to report out that it was used is there. This is the request. So that for the vendors online, is this something that anybody thinks absolutely positively cannot be done?
Who would we be sending the request to?
The request would go at this point through, think about it in the flow of data that you have currently. So if you're a county-wide agency, then it would go copy to the state, copy to the Fed. So we go to two specific points. If you were one of maybe 10 services in a county, it may go to the county, then to the state, and then to the Fed. It's basically following the same data tracking scheme as anything else that you would report out.
This is, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to comment that the current scheme allows for events data associated with an EMS encounter and demographic data. So are you thinking about this as something you would want to add to the demographic data set?
I would think it would need to be tied to the demographic data set to give validity for the request. So in other words, it has to come from a known entity within the state so that we know a service, somebody didn't create a service and try to get, 1,000 masks to sell or something like that. Not that that would ever happen, but the other part that we looked at is, if we know about services by the demographic. So if you have a service of 2 ambulances that, ran 1,000 calls in the last year and they asked for 25,000 gowns and 25,000 masks, that someone at the state or someone at the county level, depending on, again, what level of service it was, could make a determination that that request was either reasonable or not reasonable.
Yeah, so for R1, if it were to be added as a custom element to demographics, it could be implemented fairly quickly.
Okay. And I see
Eric, in what format are you looking for this data, and which delivery method? Do you want it to come through the NEMSIS pipeline or a separate pipeline?
at this point, Keenan, I don't know. I'll take the easiest, most efficient way of doing it. I'm not trying to build something here to make it complex or make it convoluted or difficult. It's when you look at these, and I have to make sure I can release these, but I can show you a couple of these forms that were created through this network that the hospitals and nursing homes were using. It's pretty straightforward stuff.
How are the hospitals and nursing homes delivering the forms?
It looks like they are just emailed in to, or I'm going back and look. I don't know. Keenan, I'll have to look. I just got these at 10:23 this morning. It's taken a while to get to this point, but I will definitely find out.
Okay. It sounds like you're really just looking for a standard formatted form that has the specific request data, and have us be able to generate that form for our customers.
And deliver that form someplace.
Yes.
Eric, this is Alan. I'm trying to get my arms around this. So are you wanting to know whether an individual crew member didn't have PPE, or are you wanting to know if the agency doesn't have enough PPE and not receiving?
Agency. I want to know that the agency is in need of PPE or is about to run out of PPE and has made a request or is in need of support to get more PPE.
Okay, so why are we creating a process outside the normal emergency management supply requisition process?
Because throughout the entire COVID response, our office was routinely on every call beat up for the fact that services were not receiving PPE. They were not prioritized. They were not getting the requests they needed. They didn't have the PPE they needed for whatever timeline in front of them. And what we're trying to do is not create a new process for that. We're trying to do exactly what the hospitals and nursing homes did to make sure that they stayed in that line to get the PPE where they needed. It's just that we don't have this network, and the hospitals and nursing homes have a requirement and have a network that they're forced to use. We do not have that because we do not have that requirement for the EMS agencies across the country. So instead of trying to create a requirement, trying to create an entire new network, the ask was, can we use the vendors that we have now so that agencies don't have to go out and create a new product or a new whatever? They can use the software that they have now. They can use the relationships that they have built to share data and use that as the process to move those requests, not replacing the requests that would go through their local cycle, but it's just like a for information only to our office, to the state that is coming to our office saying that these requests have been made. And then when someone says, hey, look, we didn't get these in New York and we needed 10,000 masks, we can follow up with the appropriate people to make sure those requests are being met.
All right, so
That's what we're
thinking
trying
out
to do.
loud. So thinking out loud for a second, I don't see this going into the PCR. That's not something you want an individual crew member trying to,
That's correct.
create data upward and create a mess. You don't need the opinion of 300 paramedics of whether the agency has enough people or not.
That's correct.
So my guess is that it would need to go, at least in our case, into the admin console or some other survey tool that then we would map the answers of that. Do you have enough PPE? Are you in a PPE shortage? They click yes, what type and how much, and somehow then we would put that into the DIM file or something, and or do you want it delivered somewhere else? I mean, I think you're asking us to create, if am I hearing you right, not necessarily something within NEMSIS or within the PCR, but some sort of survey tool that would generate that information and be able to deliver it to an endpoint.
Yes.
If I may, this is Benny from EPR Systems Fireworks. I agree with you very much, Alan. We're talking about a process which is completely separate from the EPCR itself. It seems to be more of an inventory management type of task. It could be a weekly or monthly submission, something periodic, and definitely not dependent per EPCR, but it's definitely separate from the EPCR submission itself, which is per call. The demographics is annual, so that's not frequent enough. If I understand correctly, if you want to make it like a web service to piggyback off of the NEMSIS submission, or it could be any other type of submission that we could figure out, but it's definitely not an EPCR type of submission. It's definitely more of a survey or inventory management in that manner.
And this is James from Cloud PCR. You also have to realize this isn't going to be quick because you have to get the state repositories on board to even accept all of this. It'll almost be quicker just to set up your own portal somewhere, just to have agencies go on and fill out this information somewhere.
And that's the reason for this call. And if that's what we find out, I mean, that's a route we can go. The starting point was this call to determine what capabilities are out there. And you guys have a better understanding of this than I do for your clients and customers. You see that I think Alan made a very good point and summarized it very well. You see the desire and you have the background. There's no hidden agendas or anything behind it. It's simply to understand the need of who needs what at an agency level, at a federal level, to mirror what was done for hospitals and nursing homes to make sure that supplies are located or gotten to the levels they need to be. That's the desire.
Eric, you know, the guys who worked with us on the project, you know, a month or two ago when this was first kicking off, would it be possible for a group like that to just create a web entry form that could be distributed to all EMS agencies, the states, the vendors? Everybody could direct everybody to this particular URL where a particular agency could go in and, you know, input, I'm Bob's ambulance, this is my state ID number for this state, and, you know, have a couple questions they could answer about their needs. I mean, alternatively, we could do that for our customers. And if there was a central point that was catching that information, you know, like we did with the group that did the PPE with us here a while back, that may be an easy way. I would not take this through the states. I would take it to one central location and give the states a view on that data. Obviously, they're going to want to know it, but man, to get 50 states plus, you know, the district to try to get this implemented through their vendors, it just seems like this is all going to be done by the time we get that accomplished.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, but not even just the implementation, but the different states handle custom elements very differently, and it can get filtered out in several places along the chain, and then it's no good anymore. So I'd agree with a central source that is separate from the state repository.
Okay.
And the other benefit for that is it's a cost to one vendor, and, you know, if y'all are covering that cost, you're paying for it one time, as opposed to all of us, you know, putting effort into developing the same thing and trying to send it somewhere. It just, the economics of it would be much better that way as well. And then you're getting consistency in the data. You've got your arms around that, and you're not trying to interpret how, you know, 50 EMS EPCR vendors interpreted what you put out.
Perfect. Anyone else on the call have agree, disagree, have any other comments or suggestions?
James with Cloud PCR again. I agree completely with that. If you had some sort of central location, even like a web form with an API hit, it would be super simple just to create our own form as well that can hit that. You'd get your data exactly how you request it. And I think all the other vendors would agree, like an API hit or something like that would be the easiest way to implement to get you what you want to one location.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's Frank with R1. We would agree for sure. If this needed to live in NEMSIS somewhere, we would most want it to live in a DEM file. That's probably the closest place it would live. Not that it should be there, but probably just a separate repository so you don't have to deal with all the complexities of actually getting that data aggregated would be the best approach. We agree.
And I think if it's
and did you say, Eric, that you knew
I think if it's a central point, you'll have better chance of compliance with all the different agencies actually completing the form and sending you the information.
Okay. We're hoping the compliance.
And did you
piece,
say you'd be able to route the messages from that you knew who to send it to at the different states and different counties?
and we would work through the state EMS offices and with the state data managers. That's always been our point of contact. I am not sure how logistics worked with the individual states during the distribution process. We've asked for some background information on that, and I have not gotten total clarity on how that process worked. So I think what I'm hearing as part of your question is, once you have that, how does that information work its way back through to the people who need to have it? So certainly the state EMS offices are the key for us. And then the emergency management process through the FEMA regions were the ones that were the points of contact on the report outs, which is where we saw disparity. So that's what we're trying to determine.
Eric, there's several comments in the chat ranging from looking at this through inventory management, and then Dan Van Orney just brought up a great point with if we do a central website with a form, vendors could possibly include a link within their software, and that would be easier than other inventory. So as I'm reading that, Dan, it sounds like you're suggesting that when the clinician is in the PCR, that there may be a link to an external form or an external site where they could input their need for additional PPE. I'm not saying this as needing to be related to a specific incident. Right.
So I think that would be incredible. I think that's kind of phase 2 or phase 3 of this process. I think Alan's spot on with what he described early on, which is a very simple, centralized requesting process. So let me start there. I think I have the information at least to get started. Work with the powers to be to sketch out some options, and then determine some cost and see how quickly I can move this forward. I have the information I need from the group, and I really appreciate that. It was really a go or no go, and what are some of the steps that you recommend for moving something like this forward? You've heard time and time again, many of you from me say that this is not in my area of expertise, obviously. That's why I come to this group, for you to provide me with some of the solutions to say, hey, look, you're heading down the wrong path, or, you know, here are some options. I like the options that I hear. Obviously, time is of the essence with this particular project because there are funding opportunities available to pay for it, number one. And number two, we're preparing for what could potentially be a second wave as bad, if not worse, than what we had early this year. So we want to make sure that if that happens, we have a process to make sure that PPE is going out to providers that make the request, and we're not in a situation where we're hearing routinely that people are not getting the supplies they need to keep their providers safe. So that's the ultimate goal. With that, Julianne, I'll turn the agenda back over to you. If you can provide me with the comments and chats, I'll follow up with you sometime this afternoon.
Absolutely. We'll capture all of that discussion in the chat feature as well, so that it's reviewed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for putting that in. We appreciate that. And then, as always, if there's additional comments, questions, concerns, you're welcome to use the chat feature. We capture all of that, but you're also welcome to reach out to us, email or phone call. This will be a great discussion to follow up on. Next on the agenda, we'd like to have Laurel talk to us for a few minutes about the maintenance window.
Hey everyone, hope you can all hear me. I'll try and keep this short and sweet. So the NEMSIS maintenance window for June is yesterday and today. We started some maintenance yesterday morning and it's already complete. So if you had any issues with submission, the website, etc., that would be why. You should no longer be having any issues. So please do let us know if you're having trouble with submission or accessing the website or other services. Because maintenance should be complete and we would like to fix any outstanding issues. Coming up in July, we are going to be doing some maintenance to disable TLS 1.1. So if you are still using TLS 1.1 to submit to our web services, you will need to make some changes so that you are ready to use TLS 1.2 by our July maintenance window, which is the second week, Tuesday and Wednesday, the 7th and 8th of July. Does anyone have any questions about this? Excellent. If you come up with a question or have any concerns, feel free to reach out to me via email and I will get you an answer as fast as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Bridget, do you have some information for us on the annual meeting?
Can I say one thing to Laurel? Do you have any testing thing? Because I know Microsoft products have in the past defaulted to 1.1 TLS, and if there's any kind of test site that you had available so that they know that they're ready, that might be helpful. Just a thought.
You know, I don't know that we specifically have a test site. I think that our compliance and validator services are new ones that are at compliance.nemsis.org and validator.nemsis.org, those URLs. I believe those ones already have TLS 1.1 disabled, so if you've submitted to either of those services, that would be a good test, but I can look into that and let you know if that's not the case.
Okay, that sounds perfect, actually.
Okay.
Any other questions for Laurel? All right, Bridget, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to let you know that we have been able to go ahead and set the dates for the virtual meeting that we're going to do this year. The boot camp, remember, that is going to be for our states that, you know, need a little refresher, need a little bit of help, and our brand new people coming in. We are going to be doing that on August 25th. So we're going to set the hours from 9 a.m. to 12 noon on Mountain Standard Time. The larger group that we normally do, our face-to-faces that we do, normally those big ones, we're going to set for September 15th, 4-hour block, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Mountain Standard Time. Chris is going to get this added over to the website, so with all of the information that's going to come with that. And then we're still putting all of the agendas and everything like that together, so hang tight with us on that, and we'll get that out to you guys as soon as we can.
Any questions or concerns about the annual meeting?
Bridget, when you said the September 15th, so is that 1 day and not 2 days?
Yeah, we're gonna do it in that time block, so that 4-hour time block on just that 1 day. I mean, we could probably, I mean, it kind of depends on what kind of agendas we're looking at too. Who knows, as far as like time, you never know, we may be able to add an hour or so. We're still trying to come up with all of that for you guys to make sure that everything's covered. That is super important.
Yeah, Keenan, this is Clay. You bring up a really good point in regards to the brevity of this meeting compared to meetings in the past. Only 4 hours compared to basically 2 days. I think the idea here is on the books. There's clearly some information that's very interested in sharing that we know of now. For example, CMM T3 and what they're doing to actually collect and analyze the data to evaluate that program. We may, just based on the conversation with Eric just now, there may be other things clearly that pop up that we need to bring to the group. And I think we're pretty fluid with the idea that if we need to just set up another meeting later after this date, or even before this date, if things were to escalate quickly, I think with the Zoom option, we'll be able to get that set up quickly and hope you'll be able to attend. So we're now just hoping for the 4 hours, but if it looks like the agenda and the things that we need to discuss will extend that, and we'll just set up another date.
Clay, I understand. I think that some of us would prefer to sort of know what the dates are, have them set out, and maybe have some concerns that if it is a 4-hour block of time instead of 16 hours across 2 days, what will end up happening is we'd end up with 4 hours of presentations that we sit through, and all of the dialogue and all of the true benefit of having everybody in the same space is completely lost.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's the actual value of this meeting to begin with, is our ability to talk face to face. Of course, that's not possible. We want to ensure this meeting that we have lots of time for dialogue. That becomes difficult with 70 people via Zoom, but clearly possible and better than nothing. So again, yeah, we'll be sure and do that to ensure that we're not just lecturing to folks for 4 hours. There'll clearly be lots of opportunity for dialogue as best we can on Zoom. And then again, if the topics become large enough that we need to extend to another day, we'll do that.
Was for the second potential meeting?
Could you repeat that, David? Sorry, you broke up a little.
I think he was asking, and we also have a question in chat from Matthew, if we could perhaps reserve a tentative second date so that it can be booked in advance. So if we're going to extend into a second set of discussions, if we could book that out in advance. I think that was the gist of the question.
Yeah, that's great. I think we'd be able to do that. I think we'll take a look at what's coming in on the agenda and what's happening at the national level. If we need to extend this 4-hour period, we'll do that quickly before and keep the same date. But yeah, if we get down the road and things get crazy, we need to set up another day, we'll do it well in advance.
So is there the reason that it'll be 4 hours, is there a hope that we're going to have different dates with smaller meetings with like those breakout groups that we used to have where we all discuss, the issues and items and come up with, thoughts, processes, suggestions? Are those going to happen before this meeting in small?
Yeah, Jennifer, good question. We clearly are hoping to make use of the Zoom rooms. I guess what I'm kind of hearing is maybe folks want us to extend this period to greater than 4 hours. There's clearly the agenda items that we could attempt to cover in this meeting. We were just concerned about people's ability to really stay concentrated and be able to attend longer than a 4-hour meeting. If folks want to try to do this in a 6-hour day or an 8-hour day and just include more topics, there's clearly enough topics that we could cover. We were thinking of just covering the most eminent, but if people feel like we should extend the hours on this to be a full day, we're happy to do that.
I think that'd be warranted. Just as it's a conference, even though it's virtual, and just want to have the day be reserved for that, because it is a national conference, and it's for the again, like Keenan was saying, it's about the dialogue and not just presentations. Like if you just want to do a presentation, you could just pre-record that. Even you wouldn't even need a meeting.
Would you prefer a longer day, or would you prefer it broken out into 2 shorter days?
I would definitely say we need enough time to accomplish the goals. Not that I'd say that everybody wants to be on a 6-hour phone call, but 4 hours seems kind of tight to me. That was my thinking.
But what about something like 2 hours with a half-hour in between, right? Because part of the good point of everybody being in the same room is you could tell who's on their computer working and who's paying attention, right? And actively participating. So maybe to encourage the active participation, if it's not one huge block, maybe we could do 2 hours, half-hour break, 2 hours, half-hour break, or something along those lines. So I personally enjoy, kind of like Keenan was saying, the back and forth, and you get to hear what's going on in other agencies, other states, other vendors. And we always have found that so incredibly useful when we get together. I'm hoping that we can still have that virtually.
So Jen, I've got a follow-up question on that for you. If we did 2-hour sections with a half-hour break in between, as a vendor planning your day, would you return to the second session or the third session? So that's part of our concern, is engaging the group for long enough to have a meaningful discussion, but not so long that everybody's tired of sitting at their desk listening in that virtual space. But then if we break, will you guys return? Would you come back to the next session, or would you pick and choose? Would you want to pick and choose which sessions you attended or which topics you attended?
I would probably treat it like I was attending a meeting. So I would block the whole day, and that's what it would be for, is to do that, to attend and to be a part of it. I don't know how everyone else would handle it, but I would definitely come back, because you never know where the conversations in these meetings are going to go, and they don't always stay on topic. So I would definitely come back to each session. But others may be the opposite. You're right. Others may, it's got to be the whole 4 hours at once, or not. So I don't know which would be best for everyone. I just know I would come back.
So this is Samantha with ESO, and I think if we have this on our calendars early enough, and we know that, hey, on this day, we're gonna have a 2-hour block and this is gonna be the discussion topic, I will be there as long as I'm able to block off my calendar in advance. I personally would prefer shorter time periods spread out over a couple of days so that I could be more focused in those meetings, because I can guarantee you by the end of 6 hours, we're all gonna be wiped. It'll be very challenging for us to give it our full attention.
That was our primary concern. Go ahead, Frank.
I agree completely. 2 hours a day for 5 days or something would be definitely my preference, if we're all just sharing our preferences.
we want your preferences. If you have a preference, we want to hear it, because this is such an unusual facilitation for this annual meeting, where we're looking at those that dynamic that's going to be most beneficial to all of our stakeholders. And Ben, I did catch your comment on the chat that the agenda will be published in advance. So whichever way that we proceed, it will be clear what time a discussion starts and what is involved in those discussions. So definitely an agenda ahead of time.
Yeah. I think broadly I agree with Samantha, is that, you're competing with schedules on our end. And so the nice part about virtual, which, I think we're looking at, how do we accommodate a virtual conference ourselves moving from face to face, is that you can have more people than we would be able to send in person. So there's a benefit, as we can actually bring, more assets that could have perspective and insight. The challenge though is you're competing with their schedule. So if we can, have that, if we can have that kind of framed out so that we know which assets to have available, as well as, Samantha and I think Frank just said, is, having a 4-hour open block is very challenging, especially, if we want them to be focused. So, if it's 5 days and 2-hour chunks here or there, I think, we can really be targeted and we can assign the right people.
Yeah, this is great. Related to that, yeah, this is really good discussion. We actually talked about this a little. Maybe we could set this up where we have shorter time periods over separate days, and then have each of those days be a very specific topic. We talked about potentially doing this, maybe having a section on one day that's completely related to ET3, for example. Maybe on another day, another important topic that we need to cover in regards to what we're going to be doing in tool development over the next year as related to HIE and the exchange of ePCR data back into the EMS record and into hospital records. So maybe that could be another day. That may help so that different expertise within your organizations could attend on different days and be more focused on their area of interest. That makes some good sense.
Clay and Julianne, I think that my personal preference, and I think what we would do, is if you had it over the course of 2 days, and then broke it up to sort of tenable, digestible segments in those 2 days, we would ask all of our people to block off those entire 2 days, the same as if we were going to put them on a plane and send them to Utah, because it's that important. And I think regardless of how we break it up, I would like to see us not decrease the scope of the meeting in the interest of, we can't be there in person. This is becoming sort of the new norm, as people would use. And I think we should get as much accomplished as we can possibly can.
Yeah, thank you, Keenan.
That's a great point. Thank you, Keenan. Any other input? We really are so very open to how to make this most valuable for you. So James and Anthony, great points on the chat. Thank you. 1 to 2 hour sessions, break them up into more than one day. Fewer days, shorter sessions in the morning after lunch. Okay, great comments in the chat. Thank you so much for those. Okay, Jen has already made a request that she would like her lunch delivered promptly. And the huge tragedy of this is not being in Park City together and having that bacon that they make. So, I mean, there's some significant tragedies all across the board. If you have other ideas, thoughts, we truly need to make this annual meeting as valuable, as pertinent, as accessible as we can to all of our stakeholders. So we truly appreciate your input from the vendor perspective. We appreciate input from the states. We really rely on your request and preference and input to be able to make this meaningful for everybody. So if something comes up and you have a thought, feel free to call us, email, whatever works for you. We are here to have those conversations. Anything else on annual meeting? All right, sounds good. Josh.
Yes.
Will we turn the time over to you for a few minutes?
Yeah, let me get my screen sharing up here.
All right, thank you.
Okay. First is just a follow up to what Laurel talked about. I just checked compliance.nemsis.org. TLS 1.1 is disabled there. And same thing on validator.nemsis.org. So those would be good places to test to make sure everything's good. Okay. My agenda topic is another update to the performance measures. I'll show you from the dashboard view first. We have implemented Hypoglycemia 01. Hey, it refreshed. That's nice. We'll let that get up there again. Hypoglycemia 01, treatment administered for hypoglycemia. This comes from the NEMSIS performance measures. And you can see the performance trend there, which is somewhat downward. It does have some interesting differences by geography for some reason. The Northeast kind of sticks out as being different than the rest of the country. So that's the dashboard view. It is implemented in the web service. So if you look at get this one here, the list benchmarks request, then hypoglycemia 01 is one of the benchmarks listed there now. And then of course you can do the retrieve benchmark request. Here I've just asked for the hypoglycemia data by calendar month. And so you can see my results there. So it's in both the web service and the dashboard. Let me give you a reminder on documentation. So from the dashboard, I can go to a companion document right there. Or for the technical side, if I go to the web services page in the NEMSIS website and scroll down to the bottom, I'll see the performance measures API with the documentation there, the technical guide, etc. The measure definitions, if I look at those in particular, then you'll see that hypoglycemia 01 has been added to the documentation there. So you can see exactly how it is calculated, and also take a link there to the NEMSIS package for the specification of that measure. So we're going to keep rolling out. We have a few more NEMSIS measures still to roll out between now and the end of this year. Every couple months should be coming out with an additional measure in this API. Okay, any questions on the addition of hypoglycemia 01 to the performance measures service? Okay, great. All right, Julianne, should I go ahead with my next topic?
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, let me get that one up here. In a few minutes, or in a minute, Clay is going to get input from all of you regarding a potential proposal around what to do with external standards that NEMSIS uses in terms of improving consistency and usability of those standards. So we're talking about ICD-10-CM with symptoms, impressions, cause of injury. Also talking about medications from RxNorm, procedures from SNOMED. He asked me to give you a little bit of a look at some work that the NEMSIS TAC is going to be doing on the analytics side around ICD-10 and RxNorm that sort of addresses the same issue of, hey, how do we take all these standards where there's just such a plethora of codes out there, and how do we use those codes in a meaningful way? And so, you know, there's a whole pipeline here from people actually recording what they saw in the field, and documenting what the code was for what they saw in the field. And then all the way to the other end where people want to do analytics and they want to know, hey, how often did we see such and such in the field? And oftentimes data entry and analytics are different in terms of what works best, what their purposes are. In data entry, you're trying to support an EMS provider being as accurate as possible, but not taking too long to find the right code. And in analytics, you're oftentimes wanting to group things and categorize things so that you don't just list out a bunch of codes that had one call each. And so on the analytics side, we're going to be doing some work in the national databases, and this will affect, for example, the NEMSIS 3 cube, where some additional analytical roll-ups will become available. And it could affect dashboards and other reports that NEMSIS puts out as well. So I want to run through that and just what we're going to do. With ICD-10, we're going to implement a hierarchical roll-up. I've listed the data elements that this affects. I've kept in dark the ones that are about what EMS sees on a call or does, and the ones that are being targeted as for possible improvements in consistency in the data entry side of things. But 6 different elements that use ICD-10. So we're going to implement the hierarchy. It's already defined in the ICD-10 standard. It looks like this. It has chapter, section, category, 3 subcategories, and then finally the full detailed diagnosis code. And I've shown an example here of low vision, left eye, category 2, normal vision, right eye. That very specific code is part of a hierarchy that rolls up, as you can see here. And so you can pick for analytical reporting, you could pick any level of the hierarchy. Say you're only interested in things down to the category level. That would be fine because we'll implement this hierarchy that you can roll up. That should be helpful with, if we get lots of detailed codes, that's okay. They roll up to something that categorizes them. The way we'll implement that hierarchy, it is, I guess, what I would call a ragged hierarchy, in the sense that we could receive a very detailed code in the national database, like H54.0x33, but we could also receive a very general code, like H54.0 or even H54. All of those are valid according to the NEMSIS standard. And so we can receive codes in the actual raw data that are at different levels in the hierarchy. So we'll implement that ragged hierarchy by basically right-filling all of these columns. So if you're doing analysis by specific diagnosis code, that's what you would see today in the NEMSIS cube. You would get this mix of different codes here that came in. That would still be available. But if you wanted to say by subcategory 2, then even though someone submitted H54, that's okay. It would show up when you do an analysis by subcategory 2, because we've kind of filled it over. And the more detailed codes would get rolled up to that level. So that's what we're going to be implementing with ICD-10. This is just using the standard hierarchy that is already defined in the ICD-10 standard. There are other ways of rolling up ICD-10 or categorizing it, things like diagnosis related groups, DRGs, things like that. So there's potential in the future for doing other forms of roll-up as well, alongside this roll-up. But we're going to implement this official basic roll-up first. With RxNorm, we're going to take a little bit different approach. RxNorm is not hierarchical, but it is relational. And so the roll-up we're going to implement is to map to ingredients. Those are the MIN or multiple ingredient codes, as well as the IN or ingredient codes. And this affects 3 elements in this data standard. The one that's being kind of targeted for improvement is e-medications 03, medication given. Here's an example of how that roll-up mapping will work. Today, we could receive lots of different codes that all represent products that contain naloxone. And you can see all those different codes here. This is just a snippet of the many, many codes that represent different products and different formulations that are naloxone. When we implement this roll-up, it'll be a mapping back to the ingredient or multiple ingredient code. So all of these ones, naloxone hydrochloride, Narcan, naloxone hydrochloride 40 milligram per milliliter nasal spray, and Evzio, all of those will map to naloxone as the ingredient. So in analytical reports, you could continue to use the details. Those will still be available, or you could decide to do an ingredient roll-up if you just want to look at everything where naloxone was given, regardless of the submitted code. Suboxone, on the other hand, is not just a naloxone product. It's actually a mix of buprenorphine and naloxone. So Suboxone would roll up or map to that multiple ingredient code instead of the single ingredient code for naloxone. So that's the roll-up we're going to implement in RX norm to support better categorization and consistency with medications. We are not implementing, at least in the current round, we're not going to implement any roll-ups in SNOMED procedure codes. SNOMED is a multiple inheritance hierarchy. Each procedure can have multiple parents. Sounds like you have some background noise from someone joining a seminar. You could check and mute yourself. Thank you. And so we may look in the future at roll-ups potentially for SNOMED. Anyway, I wanted to just share those with you as sort of some additional input as you consider the topic that Clay is going to discuss with you next about various approaches to improving consistency and quality of some of these data elements in NEMSIS that utilize external standards. So with that, I think I'll just go ahead and turn it back over, and Clay, you could jump into that topic, and then if people have comments, you know, based on what I've shared, I think it'll probably feed into that topic as well.
Josh, we do have one comment or question in the chat on whether or not they can still send in detailed codes, and would states allow that?
That's going to be part of Clay's topic, I think.
Right.
Today, yes, you can keep sending in these detailed codes. The question is what to do in the future. So I'll let Clay kind of kick things off there.
Great, Elizabeth, thank you. Yeah, we will cover that in some detail. Can folks see my screen okay?
I can.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to stay in this mode because I want to be able to share some notes with you as well as we go through this. So yeah, this was a discussion point that we covered with the DMC early on in 2020 with the idea of developing a resolution that would hopefully be approved and passed on to NASEMSO and allow us to move forward with a way to try to handle and deal with the variety of codes that we capture under, as Josh was mentioning, those elements to utilize external standards. We have suggested lists. The idea is to utilize that great work that's been done and potentially make those defined lists, and we'll talk about that. There's been a number of comments that we've received related to this, so I'm very open to that discussion. We'll be ending at the proscribed time in about 28 minutes, and so I'll go quickly so that we can ensure that we have some good conversation. Much of this is known to folks. I'll just share with you what we have dealt with just in the last little while in regards to attempting at the national level to provide some kind of an indication of ILI type symptoms that our providers were running across it, kind of across the country, and providing that information to the feds. So here's a good example of what we ended up having to do to come up with those counts. So we ended up using 115 different ICD-10-CM codes to identify a patient who had influenza-like symptoms. if you looked at just the 2019 data, if you were just to use the primary, secondary impression where the word influenza was used, you'd end up with about 104,000 cases for 2019. We ended up really in the dashboard having about 1.6 million folks represented there. We felt like that number was pretty solid just based on the calculation you can see below. If you pull what the CDC provides in regards to the ED visits related to influenza, and then what percentage of those patients who end up in EDs come in through using an ambulance or using EMS, they estimate about 1.6 million ILI patients for 2019. Our ILI dashboard included 1.6 million. So that's how we tried to validate what we were providing to the federal government. But clearly, if we had just used influenza, again, the variety of codes that are available for our providers to document something that's happening just becomes really difficult. So we've talked about this. The problems to solve are we've got to have a code that represents one thing, right? If there's something that can be easily demarcated, we need to use one code to represent that. The number of codes that are possible hinder our providers in a lot of ways. It's very hard for them to find a specific code when there's so many to search through. And we see, and states document, that there just seems to be provider fatigue or just kind of confusion about the process. And so they choose the first thing, or they have go-to values or generic options that they choose. So we've talked about this in the past. We've tried to improve the suggested list to deal with this issue. So here's a perfect example: E injury 1, cause of injury. And if you look below in this blue box, you can see that the problem's even getting worse, right? For all of these variables, I can show you that the problem's growing, right? There's more and more codes being used per year for each of these elements. And so we spent time in 2019 to redo the suggested list. We pulled the 2018 data, and we then looked at what was provided in those many codes and ensured that the suggested list covered at least 90% of those codes. And so you can see the improvement from the 2016 suggested list to the 2019 suggested list. We even could reduce the number of codes to 17 parent codes for E injury 1 and 80 actual codes, and that represented about 91.1% of all the codes that were submitted. So these suggested lists, I think, have become pretty solid, right? And this is true for the other elements that we looked at. Here's just another example: E situation 12 and 11, so primary and secondary impressions. Again, we've been able to, you can see the numbers grew, right? In 2017, we had 4,500. In 2018, 6,800. The number continues to grow. If we were to take the suggested list in 2019, make it a defined list that our EMS agencies use, we cover 90% of these codes with 17 parent codes and 120 total codes. So we can go through this and look at all these possibilities. All of the new suggested lists capture about 90% of the codes used, with a much smaller number of codes. This was a topic that was covered in the 2019 V3 implementation call in Park City. This was a great meeting. We made great progress here. The approved decisions were that there were 9 elements that would retain a code pattern for values only. We'll talk about those. 13 elements that utilize these external standards would have a suggested value list that becomes defined or standardized. And these defined lists would be maintained to support traditional services that are offered after a 911 response, and then by EMTs or paramedics to a scene. Some of the questions that they covered: how are we going to enforce a standardized list? The idea of encoding the list in XSD was not supported. The use of validation rules to help with this process was supported. And then the work that Josh just described to you, we were told to undertake. So to have some type of an analytic roll-up that could be provided at the state and national levels. And so that's the work that Josh just described. How would we support this process for specialty care? So all those services, air medical and others who do not, who provide more than just the traditional care and a 911 senior response. The idea was to have meds and procedures for specialty care be added as custom values to the defined list and have those roll up to generic categories at the exchange to the state and national registries. That second part of that sentence has kind of fallen out of favor as we received other comments. And so perhaps the idea would be here, as I mentioned, just here briefly, for this item 2A is to have that be custom values for specialty care, but then to maintain the pattern associated with those elements so that those codes could simply roll up to states and to the NEMSIS TAC. We'd have, that would remain somewhat cumbersome, right, in that it wouldn't be standardized, but clearly just handling this, I think, for the 911 response would greatly reduce the complexity of those elements as they stand right now. So that's a change that we could potentially make. How do we keep this current? There'd be modifications made at a technical update on an annual basis, for example. And then how could we ensure compliance? We've tried to put some more thought into that under the rollout of version 3.5.0, of course, we're requiring that the ability to build a state data set builder for state level products be mandatory. And perhaps in the compliance process, because medication lists and procedures lists for types of providers within each agency are included elements in the state data set builder, we could check for compliance to ensure that a system could ensure at least that those elements are in place. That doesn't cover impressions or cause of injury or symptoms, some of the other things we really struggle with, so that's only a partial solution. So real quickly, those elements that would keep the pattern only are those that are listed here, and they simply keep the pattern because there can be such a wide variety of codes used for these elements, it would be difficult to come up with a defined list. For those that we would be providing a defined list, these are great examples. We mentioned here the three kind of ideas. This list is meant for traditionally approved care based on a 911 response. Meds and procedures for specialty care would be added as custom values, and then values outside the approved list would be allowed through just existing patterns. And then we'd have an analytical standard roll-up that Josh is working on that would make the data more usable at the state or national level. Then we just demarcated off procedures and medications because here we could potentially ensure that there was some compliance with this through the state data set. But again, the same process exists. So I'm gonna just stop right there and perhaps ask for some comments and critique. David Saylor provided some initial comments regarding these ideas. And this might be a starting place where we want to discuss the issues related to this. But before I do that, I'll just begin just based on this brief presentation. Are there questions about the approach?
When you talk about a defined list, is this a limited list?
Right, so the suggested list is a limited list, right? So we would be for example, for injury 1, we would request or require that the defined list of 17 parent codes and a total of 80 codes be used in all of the software packages to capture cause of injury.
And you're going to have to maintain the list for critical care and air and all that?
No, we wouldn't maintain. That's a great question. We would not maintain the list for critical care, and those could be state level lists. Those could be other lists, but they would just be added as custom values. would roll up as long as they conform to the underlying pattern.
So, Clay, this is Samantha with VSO. That is one thing that I have a concern with the idea of each state selecting what their medication or procedure code would be, and then potentially having ESO having to maintain 4 or 5 different codes based off each state for a different custom list. Going back to the naloxone example, if we had each state selecting one of those codes as their custom value, that would be a real challenge for us.
Yeah, that's a good point, Samantha. So I'll clarify just a little bit. Of course, the codes that sit in the defined list that are associated with the traditional care of patients for a 911 response, those would be set, right? So the only
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I'm concerned that if each state gets to select what their RX norm code is for the critical care medications that is defined as their custom list, that we could potentially have the same medication in our system with 6 different codes based off 6 different states' decisions.
I agree with Samantha. And it seems like that creates a new burden for state data managers to sort of keep up with what is now their own standard across the country.
My concern is limiting or placing all of the critical care meds in a custom element. It might be worthwhile to look at maybe having defined list for 911 responses and then enforcing that maybe in schematron, and then allowing calls that are not 911 responses to accept any RX norm code.
This is Bennett at Image Trend, and we had a meeting yesterday to discuss this, and I think I'll leave our multiple parties to kind of weigh in. But I kind of want to take one step back, and we just talk about here's a proposal, and there's been some discussion about enforcement. What's the idea of how this rolls out practically? I mean, is this 3.5.1? Is this 3.5.0? I'd be interested to hear that.
Yeah, Ben, it's a good question. I think the underlying idea is we'd have this in place for 3.5. Depending on the implementation that we choose to use, we could roll it out sooner, but I think clearly the idea is that this would be implemented as part of 3.5.
Clay, we are all actively programming 3.5 right now. And I don't know about reverse or changing the course of the ship after the ship sort of set sail here.
Yeah, of course, we're not encoding these in XSD. These would be the lists that I'm sure you all maintain in some form. The patterns remain. Yes, sir.
The maintenance is not the different vendors will have different processes for their suggested lists. I don't think it's right to assume that the suggested list is somehow less work than the XSD.
Okay, well, I won't make that assumption. I apologize.
Wait, is there concern that you're in essence setting up a de facto HOPA practice? What happens if an 911 agency is using a medication or procedure that's not on your list? Do we pretend that they didn't do it, the procedure, or use the medication?
Well, the underlying pattern is still available, right? So the underlying pattern, it's no different. I'm just assuming, and I'm speaking at a high level here, but for the most part, the products that I've seen, they provide a list for our providers to utilize, but then that list is not limited. There's other mechanisms whereby they can do searches and utilize anything that's associated with the ICD, for example, the ICD-10-CM pattern for that element. They can utilize any element or any value that's within that pattern. So this pretty much remains the same, except what we're requesting here is the initial list or the initial working that you provide, the GUI that you provide for your clinicians to utilize. You probably provide some kind of a common list that they can most easily go through. That's why the suggested lists have been in place since the beginning of version 3. And hopefully people have used those to some value. These defined lists would try to, quote, standardize that initial lookup. But still, there's no scope of practice here. The patterns remain the same. They're still in place. If you want to have a ICD-10 logical search for someone to look outside of the existing list, they'd still be able to do that. Does that answer the question, Ellen?
I was, I guess, less so concerned about ICD-10s, but more so on the SNOMED and RX norm side. You're not proposing, I fundamentally agree that drive it back to the higher level code so that whatever variation of, you know, name of Narcan or code drives up to a single thing that we can measure. That's great. We probably would all support that. Are you suggesting that the list of available medications would be limited?
Right, yes. So let's go to, and so medications is a good example, right? So the idea with medications was the list that is available for BLS and LS care, ground response to a 911 request for service, that list is fairly truncated compared to the total RX norm. So the idea there for like naloxone would be to provide one standard code, and that's available now in suggested lists.
Yeah.
But we get people to go outside of that suggestion. And so the idea here is to have a more defined list for that group of providers and clinicians.
You know, if I can, you know, jump in here specifically about medications, you know, I think there's a lot of discussions on each of the different ideas here. But if, you know, you're talking about medications specifically, you're right, there are these suggested lists, but also the states have mechanisms in place now that they could enforce that, right? I mean, I see that there's a larger issue here on reporting, on the expansiveness of lists. Trust me, I hear it from agencies all the time when they say, you know, I see 10,000 medications, which one do I pick? You know, but the state actually has the ability through the schematron right now to implement, these are the values I'm going to accept, and these are the ones I'm going to warn or error out. So, you know, I mean, I think that, right, could be solved today. I think the ICD-10 issue is a bigger conversation. I do see some merit in the roll up. You know, what's the parent code or what's the root code? You know, I think that's a bigger conversation about how are you reporting. I mean, I agree that a lot of agencies may have in their system a value that's active that they don't fully understand themselves. They're down into the second or third subclass of a code, and they don't understand that they're indicating this is, you know, the third time someone's broken their left wrist. You know, and we would want to look at the higher parent root to say, you know, it's just a fracture of a wrist, and maybe specifically that it's the left wrist, right? But from a reporting standpoint, that design in the nomenclature of the code allows you to run a query based back to that root. Now, I think, you know, the vendors could certainly limit what they're showing and making available to those agencies. So, I mean, I think there's multiple topics here, right? There's meds, there's procedures, there's all the fields that are affected by ICD-10. You know, I kind of share, Alan had some, you know, it sounded to me like a few concerns a moment ago, and I can see how this conversation is going to go with, you know, our critical care clients to say, you know, here's another barrier to your data going to EMS repositories, which is kind of broadly an industry challenge, is that, you know, if you look at the EMS survey, how many critical care segments across all the states are reporting what's the relationship of regulation versus not. I think that's, you know, a whole topic itself. But if we put barriers to them getting that data, they'll push back and try to move out of the space and say we're hospital providers or some other kind of provider. And so I don't know. I mean, I think, right, they have, to your point, the meds for 911 response are largely the same. You know, we know Narcan is Narcan. We know Epi 1 to 10 is Epi 1 to 10. And those suggested resource lists are published. They could be enforced through a schematron, you know, but which states have actually taken that step?
Right. It's Frank with R1. I agree completely with what Ben's saying. It's a real problem. We see the data coming in, you know, from all the vendors on our billing side as well, and there's a real issue here with these not being categorized correctly. However, I don't think the suggested lists as a part of the standard limiting them is the right approach. It certainly wouldn't be for us in NEMSIS 3.5. It's a little late for that, but
yeah.
That's just our perspective.
Yeah. Clay, I worry about, EMS, you rarely find agencies that do strictly, well, you may find a bunch that do strictly 911, but a lot of 911 agencies do critical care, they do general transport, they cross over. And so, that's one factor. But, it's not unusual for the practice of medicine, pre-hospital medicine to evolve. It was just not too long ago that, tourniquets and, TXA and other things, come in and are asked to be added by early adopters who are testing those things out. And we can add that to our software if we need to not send those up through NEMSIS. We could also accommodate that as well, but it would seem like the question would be asked, how many of these are being done, at some point in time as these new treatments and medications start taking a foothold.
Right. The coronavirus is a great example. We had everyone asking how many cases of coronavirus are at this agency or in this state. And then, the first answer is, well, there's no real way to identify a particular virus in the back of an ambulance. And then I think Colorado was the first one to put in the state data standard that they are doing the swabs in the ambulance. So now there's a procedure code for it. So, that ability to scale and move with EMS operations across the country is one of the great strengths of the NEMSIS data standard, and I don't think we should limit it.
Yeah, these are really good points. I'm just struggling a little bit with why this current process stands in the way here. So for example, for specialty care, I'll just lump it like that. There's really no change here, other than we'll ask states if they to develop a custom value list that would help you to. Hopefully states would collaborate, and you'd have the same code used across the same code set used across several states or something like that. But still, there's no limitation. The pattern is still available. The lookups would still be available for critical care. So I'm not seeing how this limits or changes anything for specialty care.
I think you kind of hit it right there, Clay, is that hopefully they will. They never have. Like you saw states using image trend for travel out of the country. They all had different codes. They were all different. There was no consistency at all whatsoever. So when you say hopefully, that's probably not.
Yeah, so that remains no different than it does now. And if there's a better solution for specialty care, we would love to entertain that and have that be part of this process.
I think we're concerned, this idea of custom values, right? I mean, we connect to a resource now that, we're able to kind of easily maintain, refresh, update, right? And we're not, I don't need a bunch of clinicians to validate that what's coming from, SNOMED or RX norms is correct, et cetera, right? It's just a resource that we can plug right into the system. If now we're going to switch to custom values, I mean, all of those custom values, they take dev time, they take energy to create. And I think there's a lot of valid concern brought up here and tied into kind of what David just said is, it's great to think that the states may, promote interoperability, but practically I see a lot of barriers to that. If it's not a published standard, we're holding our breath and hoping on dreams, because I'll have 9 states in one region and, I'll end up with 5 different standards for what are those, which breaks down the ability for national reporting across that, or at least it overly complicates it, right? Because now to write my queries, I've now got to go and look up what are these published custom, values for all of these different states. Whereas, right now, when Boston MedFlight wants to use, a particular medication, there's a resource where that already has a code, it has a value. I mean, if I were an admin, right, at a state level, and I want to clean up, the meds that are getting sent to me, I see this all the time. I run reports in states and I see inappropriate meds sent through by, EMS, from multiple vendors, including ourselves, right? Because we give them the option to select. Then, as a state, I enforce that through a schematron, and that exists. I can publish the list. I can tell folks, I can make vendors aware. We're not going to accept that data if you're sending me a value for Narcan, which is not the code I want for Narcan. For meds, even procedures, I think, there are tools available right now. Like, this doesn't involve development, doesn't involve cost, much cost for vendors, right? We're already dealing with schematron changes. The ICD-10 thing, I think, is a broader conversation. But I kind of, sympathize with Alan's point is, when you look at states that are trying to be progressive and they're pushing out, new protocols and cutting edge things, having these lists just adds one more step, right? Now we need the state to come in, update their list, publish those. We need all vendors to adapt for compliance if they're going to have clients that are wanting to say, document that they did a simple thoracostomy as a procedure, because it's, a new thing that's coming in Texas. It's active right now in Texas. So, now they've got to go and update their list with potentially custom value. And what happens when that custom value becomes a real value?
Right.
I agree with Ben. And Clay, I'm curious as to, we kind of heard Josh sort of lay out a really good methodology for rolling up codes and sort of getting the information, the data, despite what's sent. How are we still trying to complicate this, is my question.
Right. So I'll respond. We're at a time, and I apologize. We wanted to make sure that Eric could have all the time that he needed regarding the PPE discussion. But I'll just summarize that. Yeah, this idea of providing custom values for specialty care, we don't need to. That's kind of outside the scope a little bit here. We were just trying to provide a mechanism to help you folks. If there's a strong feeling that states won't provide some kind of consistency for you, then those categories that for those elements that really anything could be included, those could just continue to be a pattern. If you folks feel like there's no way for that to work, then we would just have those be like these. We'll just keep the pattern only for those kind of calls. So I think that's a good point. Let's rethink that piece clearly. That's just an add-on. The idea here is to try to provide some kind of more consistency for the 911 transports, I think was the idea of this to begin with. But let's try to pick this back up on our next call. I apologize. I don't want to take people away from their day. We knew we probably wouldn't get through this. I think this stimulated some great conversation. we'll send out this PowerPoint presentation on the NEMSIS Google group so that you can review it. And this will be the initial conversation for next call. Does that make some sense for folks?
Yeah, and if there's other topics for the next time, then I wouldn't want this to suck everything down.
Well, this is incredibly important. I think we need to solve this. This has been stalled a little bit by the coronavirus, and so we need to get this moving along. We'd like to make sure that we can make some decisions here. I think the overall thing here is just trying to replace suggested lists with defined lists that have some schematron warnings to try to provide some adherence to the standard. If there are other ancillary pieces here that we need to remove or to streamline, let's do it. Let's make this work and be valuable for you as well as our providers. So thank you for the conversation. Clearly all the information the chat will keep track of. We'll pick right up with this again on our next call. So thank you. Julianne, I'll turn it back over to you.
Clay, we can push your second topic to next time. Eric, do you want to take a few minutes to talk about your last topic?
Hi, Julianne. I'm looking at the picture. What is the last topic on the agenda?
That would be the advisory groups.
Oh, no. I mean, we've talked about these a little bit in the past, just to say that we are finalizing the advisory groups. We are in the process of picking some dates for the first meetings. Letters are going out requesting everyone's acceptance, and you should hear more about that next week. That's all I want to say about that. I mean, we haven't set agendas or topics or content or anything like that at this point.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or concerns? We had a lot going on this call today. Is there anything else that we need to discuss before we let you back at your day? Okay. Thank you for all the comments, input. We appreciate that. We appreciate you participating in the chat as well for those who who weren't able to do it over the phone. So we will capture all of those for review and discussion. Our next meeting is June 24th, same time, same place. Please look for follow-up materials being sent to the Google group. We appreciate your time, taking time out of your busy day, and for participating and giving us your feedback and input on these topics. So with that, thank you very much for being here, and we will see and talk with you again in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone.